In episode 1, we follow the frantic hours after President Kennedy was shot, the escape through Oak Cliff, the struggle inside the Texas theater, and the shock of Jack Ruby stepping into history. Today, the story turns personal. The letters, the friendships, the moments of grace and pain that shaped the people behind the case. This is episode 2.
Rick, one of the artifacts I visited the museum and I had the privilege of seeing, you showed it to me personally, was a letter from Jackie Kennedy right after the assassination and the murder of J.D. Tippit. She sent a letter to Marie Tippit, J.D.'s wife. Could you share that letter with us? What were the contents and the timing of when it was sent?
After the assassination, grief linked two families forever. Jackie Kennedy's handwritten letter to Marie Tippit became one of the most intimate artifacts from that week.
Through my work with the museum, and Jeff Lucio was my mentor and friend, he said, "Dale, let's go have lunch with Jim Leavelle." Okay. Well, I mean, who would turn that down? And that Jim and I became a real strong friendship. And a few times early in our relationship, Marie would be coming and joining us for lunch. And I found her such a kind-hearted human being. And I really thought that she was my second mother. She was that motherly person that would just be so kind. And she started sharing information with me, and she showed me the letter. And soon after the president's assassination, she got a handwritten letter from Jackie Kennedy. And I'll just paraphrase the part that really just stuck with me it will stick with me for all my life. Is Jackie told Marie, "My husband was killed. Your husband was killed because my husband was in town. And we will always share that bond. And when she lights the eternal flame, that eternal flame in Arlington National Cemetery will be lit for J.D. Tippit and for the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy." And that's pretty powerful.
That letter was only the beginning. In the years that followed, Marie Tippit carried her husband's legacy into every place his name was written.
I'll never forget, you were kind enough to bring Marie to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, and it was during National Police Week, and it was the day of the candlelight vigil that evening. And I remember taking Marie to the wall where her husband's name, J.D. Tippit, is inscribed, along with more than 24,000 other fallen American law enforcement heroes. And his name is on that wall next to another officer from New York City, killed earlier in the 1900s. His name was John Kennedy. And we put those names side by side. It was not a coincidence, of course, to remind all visitors of the link between J.D. Tippit and John Kennedy. There is a very strong bond there, and you've talked about it. Jackie Kennedy recognized it. And we were so proud to have Marie there that day. And then that evening, at our candlelight vigil, attended by some 30,000 people, very moving moment. Marie was recognized on the dais as the surviving wife of J.D. Tippit. It was a moment I'll never forget, and I was so appreciative to you for bringing her there.
Another figure whose image became inseparable from that weekend was Detective Jim Leavelle. Jim is the detective standing beside Oswald in one of the most recognized photos in American history.
As you did with Jim Leavelle. Jim Leavelle came and visited the National Law Enforcement Museum after it was dedicated, and he also became our first witness to history speaker. We started a whole series of events, law enforcement officers that were involved in historical moments. And Jim Leavelle was kind enough at the age of 90 to fly from Dallas, Texas to Washington, D.C. to do an oral history about his experience, and he just amazed us all with his recollections from those days in November of 1963. So I thank you so much for all of that. Yeah, one question I have hundreds, and I'm sure Dennis and Bill do too, but one question I want you to clear up. I seem to recall somewhere that the suit, the tan suit that Jim Leavelle was wearing right behind you in that iconic picture, was borrowed. It was not his suit. Is that factually accurate?
Yes, it's actually, he purchased it from somebody and he said that the guy he brought it from got too fat to wear it. So he bought it from Jim. He called it his Neiman Marcus suit. And so he had it tailored to fit him. And he wore that suit actually pretty much his entire career. And it does remain in the museum at the sixth floor museum to this day. And it is his original hat. And he always will tell you, everybody says, "Oh, you're the white suit." And you're correct, Craig. That is a tan suit.
And we were talking earlier about the hat. I've always been intrigued. I think in Texas, a lot of cops wear those hats. But you have a story, Rick, about that hat. Tell our audience the story behind the hat.
Yeah, the hat is when Jim transferred into the robbery homicide, who were the elite detectives in the Dallas Police Department. They were called the Fritz hats. Right. And Captain Fritz, Will Fritz, was the commander over the Fritz detectives. And they were encouraged to wear a Fritz hat or this Beaver 10X hat that Jim was wearing that day.
But before Dallas, Leavelle had already survived the attack that launched America into World War II.
And Jim is always recognized to the day he passed with wearing that hat. And the hat. And we had the honor later in life to take Jim on an honor flight, because a lot of people don't know Jim Leavelle was stationed at Pearl Harbor on December 7th. Really? During the Japanese attack. And so I arranged to be his guardian on an honor flight, which we take veterans to Washington, D.C. And we had decided when Jim was going to go that he was going as a World War II survivor, Pearl Harbor survivor, not as Jim Leavelle, the homicide detective. But the president turned to me and said, "But Rick, if he doesn't wear that hat, you got to go back to his house and get it, because I want him wearing that hat." And so during the trip, Jim wore his hat, and we tried to keep his anonymity about the president's assassination, his work in the or his fame. But one of the other veterans found out he was a retired detective. He said, "You probably know a lot about that JFK investigation, don't you?"
Oh boy! And
Jim, with his smile, says, "Yeah, I know a little bit about it."
A little bit.
And he was confronted then by the infamous Jim Leavelle in the tan suit.
Leavelle wasn't alone in the basement that day. Another detective, almost completely forgotten, may have prevented a second murder.
But there's people like Elsie Graves, who is another unknown detective that was on Oswald's other side. And Jim told me one day that Elsie Graves saved his life. And so during capturing Oswald, we emphasized that there's other people that were down there, because without Elsie Graves' actions of grabbing that pistol that day, and you think about, if you've ever shot a firearm, how hot that pistol is after firing just one shot can be. But Elsie Graves put his death grip on Ruby's revolver and wrestled it from Ruby. And the story of capturing Oswald goes a lot deeper than just than we know in this video that the military channel produced. I saw an interview of Elsie Graves, and he was so humble as Jim is, and they tried to interview him with it and said, "Well, what'd you do with the pistol?" And Elsie Graves' response was, "I put it in my pocket." "Well, what'd you do with it after that?" "I gave it to Captain Fritz." And Jim told me without Elsie Gray's grabbing that gun, he could still see Ruby trying to fire more shots out.
Right.
Continuing to try to fire that to try possibly kill Jim or other police officers.
Beyond Dallas police officers, another man's bravery defined those chaotic seconds in Dealey Plaza.
I just want to acknowledge one person that we haven't talked about that was a key player in all this. His name is Clint Hill. And I think we've spoken about him in the past in some of our podcasts. But Clint Hill was the Secret Service agent who leaped on the back of the limo after the first shots were fired and President Kennedy was shot. It was Clint Hill who tried to save him and Mrs. Kennedy with his gallant and very courageous act. Clint Hill died earlier this year. He was a friend of mine. He came to the National Law Enforcement Museum. And I just want to make sure our audience knows that there was another key player in all of this, another hero behind the badge, and his name was Clint Hill, and he's a hero and really an iconic figure in American law enforcement history.
I had the honor of at the 50th commemoration to escort Marie Tippit into the ceremony, and they called me for a secondary duty to escort Clint Hill into the ceremony. And so I took Marie over to where Clint Hill was getting out of his squad car, and I said, Marie Tippit, I'd like to have you meet Clint Hill. And I remember Clint Hill says, I've always wanted to meet that woman. And it's nice to meet you. And Clint and Marie walked down arm in arm in that ceremony. And I'll never forget that sight, because those two people suffered the most of this whole tragedy. Of course, Jackie Kennedy as well. But those two people were connected to this tragedy, an unbelievable tragedy. And it was so nice to see those two together. They sat together. I know they talked. And, Marie was just a charming lady, and Clint, I'm sure, had a very nice conversation. I just backed off. I said, my life is good right now. Two people together that had never met and always wanted to meet each other.
And some heroes weren't officers at all. One was a civilian who heard Tippit's final radio call and acted.
There was a man named Temple Bowley that if you listen to the radio traffic when Tippit was murdered, Temple Bowley got on Tippit's radio and got Tippit help. So he got on the radio and said, this officer needs help. And he described where he was at. And I looked in the records, and we had never given Temple Bowley any type of recognition on that day. And without Temple Bowley getting on that radio, we got Oswald help, or Tippit help faster.
Right.
So I got Chief David Brown to sign off a special certificate of merit, and we presented it to Temple Bowley for his actions on November 22nd, because nobody had even. And I walked up to his door in my police uniform. He goes, "I bet you want to talk to me about that incident, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "And I am so sorry. It took nearly 50 years to do this." He goes, he goes, I eventually thought somebody would knock down my door. I said, well, it's time now. And it was so nice to meet him and to thank him. And I had set up, Mary was going to be at the ceremony for Mr. Bowley. And I said, Temple, I said, Marie's going to want to ask the question. And I'm going to get you guys together and have your chat. And Marie said it would be okay to ask him the question whether J.D. Tippit was alive. And so I let them chat, and I read their lips, and they asked Mr. Bowley. I said, was their dad or husband alive? And he just kind of shook his head and said, no, he wasn't. And so Marie got some solace and some closure there, and the whole Tippit family did. And once again, I did something great.
These untold stories, small moments and private actions, are the difference between headlines and history.
That's what makes this type of interview so special, because you're able to fill in the details of those little small things that made a big difference. They made a big difference.
Yeah, they made a big difference.
And yet in the media, you're never going to hear that.
No.
No, you're not going to hear this in the news, but you hear it from Rick Janisch, the historian emeritus. That's a great title. And you certainly did your job today, filling in some of the blanks, the human, the real, the vulnerable stuff, the real stuff.
In the years that followed, Dallas struggled under the weight of its new identity, a city tied to tragedy. But the legacy didn't end there. In episode 3, we look at the aftermath, the federal tensions, the birth of the museum, unanswered questions, and how Dallas rebuilt its reputation. Subscribe now to catch that final chapter in the story that started in November of 1963.